Section 57, Part 3, Chapter 1 continued, of The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse by Vicente Blasco Ibáñez, translated by Charlotte Brewster Jordan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The very night that Julio had gone to Bordeaux, he had wandered around till sunrise, traversing half of Paris from the Lion of Belfort to the Gare de l'Est. 20,000 men, with all their campaign outfit, coming from Morocco, had disembarked at Marseilles and arrived at the capital, making part of the trip by rail and the rest afoot. They had come to take part in the great battle then beginning. They were troops composed of Europeans and Africans. The vanguard, on entering through the Orleans gate, had swung into rhythmic place, thus crossing half Paris toward the Gare de l'Est, where the trains were waiting for them. The people of Paris had seen squadrons from Tunis with theatrical uniforms, mounted on horses, nervous and fleet, Moors with yellow turbans, Senegalese with black faces and scarlet caps, colonial artillerymen, and light infantry from Africa. These were professional warriors, soldiers who in times of peace led a life of continual fighting in the colonies, men with energetic profiles, bronzed faces, and the eyes of beasts of prey. They had remained motionless in the streets for hours at a time until room could be found for them in the military trains. And Argensola had followed this armed, impassive mass of humanity from the boulevards, talking with the officials and listening to the primitive cries of the African warriors who had never seen Paris and who had passed through it without curiosity, asking where the enemy was. They had arrived in time to attack von Kluck on the banks of the Ourcq, obliging him to fall back or be completely overwhelmed. A fact which Argensola did not relate to his sympathetic guest was that his nocturnal excursion the entire length of this division of the army had been accompanied by the amiable damsel within and two other friends, an enthusiastic and generous coterie distributing flowers and kisses to the swarthy soldiers and laughing at their consternation and gleaming white teeth. Another day, he had seen the most extraordinary of all the spectacles of the war. All the taxicabs, some 2,000 vehicles, conveying battalions of Zouaves, 8 men to a motor car, had gone rolling past him at full speed, bristling with guns and red caps. They had presented a most picturesque train in the boulevards, like a kind of interminable wedding procession. And these soldiers got out of the automobiles on the very edge of the battlefield, opening fire the instant that they leaped from the steps. Gallieni had launched all the men who knew how to handle a gun against the extreme right of the adversary at the supreme moment when the most insignificant weight might tip the scales in favor of the victory which was hanging in the balance. The clerks and secretaries of the military offices, the orderlies of the government, and the civil police all had marched to give that final push, forming a mass of heterogeneous colors. And one Sunday afternoon, when with his 3 companions of the siege he was strolling with thousands of other Parisians through the Bois de Boulogne, he had learned from the extras that the combat which had developed so near to the city was turning into a great battle, a victory. I have seen much, Madame Desnoyers. I can relate great events. And she agreed with him. Of course, Argensola had seen much. And on taking her departure, she offered him all the assistance in her power. He was the friend of her son, and she was used to his petitions. Times had changed. Don Marcelo's generosity now knew no bounds. But the Bohemian interrupted her with a lordly gesture. He was living in luxury. Julio had made him his trustee. The draft from America had been honored by the bank as a deposit, and he had the use of the interest in accordance with the regulations of the moratorium. His friend was sending him regularly whatever money was needed for household expenses. Never had he been in such prosperous condition. War had its good side too, but not wishing to break away from old customs, he announced that once more he would mount the service stairs in order to bear away a basket of bottles. After her sister's departure, Dona Luisa went alone to the churches until Chichi, in an outburst of devotional ardor, suddenly surprised her with the announcement, "Mama, I am going with you." The new devotee was no longer agitating the household by her rollicking boyish joy. She was no longer threatening the enemy with imaginary dagger thrusts. She was pale and with dark circles under her eyes. Her head was drooping as though weighed down with a set of serious, entirely new thoughts on the other side of her forehead. Dona Luisa observed her in the church with an almost indignant jealousy. Her headstrong child's eyes were moist, and she was praying as fervently as the mother, but it was surely not for her brother. Julio had passed to second place in her remembrance. Another man was now completely filling her thoughts. The last of the Lacours was no longer a simple soldier, nor was he now in Paris. Upon her return from Biarritz, Chichi had listened anxiously to the reports from her little sugar soldier. Throbbing with eagerness, she had wanted to know all about the dangers which he had been experiencing, and the young warrior in the auxiliary service told her of his restlessness in the office during the interminable days in which the troops were battling around Paris, hearing afar off the boom of the artillery. His father had wished to take him with him to Bordeaux, but the administrative confusion of the last hour had kept him in the capital. He had done something more. On the day of the great crisis, when the acting governor had sent out all the available men in automobiles, he had, unasked, seized a gun and occupied a motor with others from his office. He had not seen anything more than smoke, burning houses, and wounded men. Not a single German had passed before his eyes, excepting a band of Uhlan prisoners, but for some hours he had been shooting on the edge of the road, and nothing more. For a while that was enough for Chichi. She felt very proud to be the betrothed of a hero of the Marne, even though his intervention had lasted but a few hours. In a few days, however, her enthusiasm became rather clouded. It was becoming annoying to stroll through the streets with Rene, a simple soldier and in the auxiliary services. Besides, the women of the town, excited by the recollection of their men fighting at the front or clad in mourning because of the death of some loved one, would look at them with aggressive insolence. The refinement and elegance of the Republican prince seemed to irritate them. Several times she overheard uncomplimentary words hurled against the embusqués. The fact that her brother, who was not French, was in the thick of the fighting, made the Lacour situation still more intolerable. She had an embusqué for a lover. How her friends would laugh at her! The senator's son soon read her thoughts and began to lose some of his smiling serenity. For 3 days he did not present himself at the Desnoyers home, and they all supposed that he was detained by work at the office. One morning, as Chichi was going toward the Bois de Boulogne, escorted by one of the nut brown maids, she noticed a soldier coming toward her. He was wearing a bright uniform of the new gray-blue, the horizon blue, just adopted by the French army. The chin strap of his kepi was gilt, and on his sleeve there was a little strip of gold. His smile, his outstretched hands, the confidence with which he advanced toward her, made her recognize him. Rene, an officer; her betrothed, a sub-lieutenant. Yes, of course, I could do nothing else. I had heard enough. Without his father's knowledge, and assisted by his friends, he had in a few days wrought this wonderful transformation. As a graduate of the École Centrale, he held the rank of a sub-lieutenant of the reserve artillery, and he had requested to be sent to the front. Goodbye to the auxiliary service. Within 2 days he was going to start for the war. "You have done this!" exclaimed Chichi. "You have done this!" Although very pale, she gazed fondly at him with her great eyes, eyes that seemed to devour him with admiration. "Come here, my poor boy. Come here, my sweet little soldier. I owe you something." And turning her back on the maid, she asked him to come with her around the corner. It was just the same there. The cross street was just as thronged as the avenue. But what did she care for the stare of the curious? Rapturously she flung her arms around his neck, blind and insensible to everything and everybody but him. "There! There!" And she planted on his face two vehement, sonorous, aggressive kisses. Then, trembling and shuddering, she suddenly weakened and, fumbling for her handkerchief, broke down in desperate weeping. End of section 57.